right. So you're playing poker. You're 14 years old, and now this is in Seattle. So
Yep.
is that where you grew up in the Seattle
Yeah, I
area?
grew up in Seattle. And in those days, the reason, for playing poker is poker was a network, and it was a very important network. If you got into this network, it was kind of a hierarchy. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Cincinnati Kid, but
Long, long time ago. Yeah.
okay, I mean, that has some ridiculous poker in it, but it gets a lot of details about that, right? So he's playing Steve, the Steve McQueen character is playing in Cincinnati, and he won everybody's money. So everybody owed him money. So he couldn't make any more money playing poker. He could live, I mean, everybody owed him money. So if he needed a room or a drink or a meal, whatever, he could just, show up and get it. But he'd won all their money. So he has to start going outside area. And when you go outside the area, you get in trouble. Or he had to move up to a higher level. And that's what he's trying to do. And so so in the movie, there is a single the man, Edward G. Robinson, who's the head of, the best poker player in the country. That never was true. But there was an elite level of, say, 100 or 200 players. Uh, and you had to move up in level in order to make more money. So I'm moving up in level. And as I'm moving up in level, I'm getting connections with top poker players in other places. And so when I go away to college in Boston, when I'm 17, I already have, I can get into these top private games.
So you had connections in Boston, and then where did you go? You were at Harvard at that
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
Oh, so
So
obviously
I'm
you did
playing two
well
things.
in
I'm playing in
school.
these. Yep. Yeah, I'm playing in these top games. And again, I could do it because I'm a Harvard student, right? If I'm just Doyle Brunson, they're not going to welcome me to their private games. And I'm also playing in the finals clubs at Harvard, where you got a lot of rich guys who are getting drunk and, don't mind. Think losing a couple $100 is not a bad evening. Whereas for me, I needed that for tuition. I needed that to live on.
Now, so obviously you were doing well in school while you were doing this to be able to get into Harvard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And again, sort of the math, science, ability. And again, things were easier in those days. I didn't have to show community service. I didn't have to, just, hey, you got the grades, you got the SAT scores, you can get in.
So now you're helping basically subsidize your education. That's your only job at this point. You're not working another job.
That's my only significant source of income. I worked as a computer programmer for some professors and things like that. And they paid like $5 an hour in those days. But that was more for experience and things. Poker is what paid tuition.
So you're networking at this point with poker, with the other poker players. But these are I assume some of these guys are the ones who were successful at it are pretty intelligent guys. I mean, so are these guys who just strictly were poker players, or are they your contemporaries as far as age? Who are these guys, and then and how did they help advance your career?
Okay, these are mostly like businessmen, 40s, 50s, 60s, or senior, university presidents, senators, Nobel Prize winners, professors, whatever, good players. So this is you had to be a good player to get to this level, but not focused on the money. So first of all, I'm a better player. I really am one of the, I think I was among the top, 50, 100 people in the country, in the world, really, uh, at that time. And these people were maybe in the top couple thousand. But much more than that, I needed this to, pay tuition, to pay the room and board charges, whatever. These guys didn't think the money was that significant. So if these guys lost a couple $1,000s over the year playing poker, that was fine. They didn't think twice about that. As long as, they got some fun out of it, they got some good hands, they got some connections. They did a lot of business at the poker table. And sitting there listening in on that, you could say, hey, I could do that. I could go work for you. Hey, I hear you got this opening, whatever. I need money. I've got this great idea. I want some money to back it, whatever. These were the people. And there is a certain kind of trust. You played poker with somebody for years, they always pay off. They don't, they don't welsh. They have a good head for risk and decision making. They're winning players. This is somebody you might want to invest with.
Interesting, right? I think people who were not part of that who have never been part of playing in those games, they people of that level are certainly going to take a liking to a kid who is who is good at the game, right? Who's showing that ability, that the mind to be able to play in that setting, play with an older crowd, more sophisticated, I guess, crowd, and excel at it. Now you're playing, like you said, for maybe a different reason necessarily. You're looking to survive. Now whether it's trading, poker, sports betting, when the money means more to you, that can often change how you play the game or how you trade, or your betting decisions. Did you have any of that? Did you have the ability then to be able to separate the two? Because I think it's hard. That's one of the more difficult things for most people to do when they're looking at risk management, is to when they get themselves in a situation, certainly when you're losing, is to overplay.
Yeah, no, it is a key to my success at that time that I was very good at figuring out what other people wanted. Very few people at the poker table are really there for the money. One guy wants to get a good story for his girlfriend. Another wants excitement, wants to gamble. Somebody else likes the idea of being a poker player, but doesn't really want to lose any money. And if you figure out what people want and you give it to them, then they're happy to give you their money. It sounds silly, but it works. And back in those Boston games, it's the old, I used her, she used me. Everybody knew they were there for mutual advantage, and the older guys wanted aggressive, smart kids who could bring them new ideas, who might work for them. And the aggressive, smart kids wanted people with money who could fund them or give them jobs, or just teach them about how things worked. That was very important. There were a lot of journalists. Journalists in those days were often very good poker players, politicians. I spent a couple of years in Washington, and Washington is great because people come from all over the country who are top poker players, right? In Seattle and Boston, I was playing mostly Seattle and Boston people, but you go to Washington, you get the people from all over the country, and you learn tremendous amount about, and there's congressmen, there's cabinet members, there's senior journalists, ambassadors. You can learn a tremendous amount from these people if you can be in kind of an honest conversation that everybody knows is private. And they want to teach you, right? One of the reasons they come is they want to meet ambitious, smart kids and teach them. And the ambitious, smart kids want to learn from them and find opportunities.
You see, with a lot, I had a previous guest on the show, and they were talking about how he felt he's on the spectrum, and he feels that potentially those on the spectrum have an advantage when it comes to maybe sports betting or even poker, because they're so laser focused on the data. And when I think about, and I've noticed that myself in daily fantasy sports, I'm sure maybe you have not played, but it kind of goes hand in hand with poker. It's very similar, and I've played, we call it DFS, for a living as well. And a lot of people in that world, you can tell, are somewhere on the spectrum. They're really, really bright people, but they're not necessarily sociable. So what I'm getting from you and playing in the games that you were playing in, you not only had to be good at the game, but you also had to be able to carry on a conversation. You had to be social, and so there was more to it than just maybe the poker itself.
Yeah, I'll tell you, so let's go forward a few more years. So this is the later 70s, and I'm playing in California and Las Vegas, and places like that. And I was meeting a whole bunch of advantage gamblers of various types, and we had three categories. You had the blackjack card counters. So those were the people on the spectrum. Those were the people who were laser focused, and didn't care about people, didn't want, people or human relationships to enter into it. Their only skill with respect to humans is avoiding getting kicked out. And then you have the poker players. The poker players were in the middle. So we needed the social skills to get invited to games, to get paid, to not get arrested or cheated. I mean, these are social skills. And you had to kind of understand the table and what people wanted and give it to them. But we weren't really social. We were tended to be shy, introverted, but not on the spectrum. And Poker is mainly a game of attention. You can't be laser focused. You have to have a very, very broad, uh, um, you have to notice everything, not consciously. You're not like checking boxes, but your subconscious brain has to soak in everybody's mannerisms, every word said, every, shuffle somebody makes on the chips, because all of that is going to help you. And then you had the sports bettors, and the sports bettors were social. In the first place, sports betting is mainly about figuring out what other bettors are going to do, not who's going to win the game. And second, to be successful at sports betting, most of these people moved in and started sports betting operations, independent bookie operations, or so on. Now, when I'm in Las Vegas, the mob controls everything, and you can't do it, or unless you're unless you're prepared to hire some guys with blackjacks and machine guns and whatever. I mean, you can't just set up and do it independently. But by the late 70s, when the mob is being smashed, suddenly it opened up and all these people could do independent things. So they had to build businesses. They had to hire people. They had to attract customers. They had to collect from people or whatever. So those were the social guys.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yes. When I go to these live events, or I've been invited to a lot of events, because obviously, the casinos are big with comps and whatnot. When you have the DraftKings and the FanDuels, and they were only involved in daily fantasy, they would do for their higher players that they would, of course, invite you to maybe a suite at a basketball game or an NFL game. That dried up quickly when they got involved in sports betting, and sports betting became legalized in a lot of states, because they were making a lot more money on their square sports bettors who they were willing to take a lot more action on. It was very similar to poker. When you walked in a casino, the poker rooms weren't abundant in a lot of casinos and weren't very large, not as large as they are now, because back then you just weren't making any money per square foot in a poker room, not nearly as much as you would make on a slot machine or maybe a table game. And just like any other business, you're really looking to maximize your dollars per square foot, right? And now that the game has become more popular, it is something that brings patrons into the casino. So a lot more casinos have opened up their rooms, and the poker rooms are bigger, and the sports betting rooms are bigger. But those were rooms that weren't necessarily that large back then, because they just weren't a moneymaker. But now, back to my point with the different people, I would go to these events, and the people who would show up to the daily fantasy sports events were very similar to the poker people. The guys who would show up who were the sports bettors were a lot more flashy, a lot more bombastic, maybe. And it was a different character. Now, these weren't the guys who were necessarily the winners, but these are the guys who they were playing. It's like you said, there's certain poker players who are playing for different reasons maybe than you are. These guys are playing for the excitement, the action. And you could take advantage of those type of players when you're playing poker, but it's a little bit more difficult, I would imagine, in sports betting. Now, sports betting is a market, and it's made up of all sorts. But do you still think there's a way to can we still make money? Can professionals still do well at sports betting?
Okay, well, but just have there. First, I'd say, yeah.
I'm sorry.
In the 1970s, the casino poker room was usually under the stairs next to the loudest slot machines, and they would open and close at weird hours. The casinos are very uncomfortable with the idea that somebody in the building is losing money and we're not getting it. So they hated it. It was just really foreign to their entire DNA. And the only reason they tolerated it was to kind of give part of the Old West mystique. Some people would, show up and, maybe you get a convention in or something and somebody would want to play poker. And it felt bad that the casino would say, oh, we don't offer that. But they surely didn't make it attractive or convenient. The rates were high. I never played in casinos in those days. I hate casinos. But yeah, so that was then. And then it was the poker boom, which really started online. And then suddenly it became a moneymaker, and they started actually treating poker players reasonably well, although you still don't get a lot in the way of comps for it. You're doing it. Sports betting is a more decentralized industry. Yes, it is quite easy. It is one of the, easy. That's part of the things I tell people. It is quite easy to find advantageous sports bets and to make consistent profits. It's hard to make a living doing it for various reasons. The main one is You have to find somebody who's willing to keep writing you checks. And retail sports betting operators are not willing to do that. They simply cut you off if you or limit you to trivial bets if you're a winner. So you need to find a strategy for that. But yes, it is easy. It is, in one sense, it's not as easy. For example, in the 1970s, you could just bet the Lakers at home and you would make consistent money because the Lakers were a glamorous team. LA was a high betting town. And so there was always excess money on the Lakers when they played at home. And the bookies would knowingly shade the odds so that it was a profitable bet for people willing to bet against the Lakers because they just wanted to reduce their risk. They wanted to balance their books, and they didn't care if you made a little money on it because they didn't care who won as long as they could have a balanced book. That was the old mob strategy. And so it was that easy. Okay, today it's not that easy, but it's not that much harder.